on to the mother of all talk shows with me, George Galloway. London calling, and it's been some time. Hit the phones, Jack and Jack.
People of America, this is the President of the United States. You are listening to George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. George is a Scotsman, unlike me, an Irishman. Enjoy.
Enjoy, at least as much as me. I'm very, very happy to be back on WBAI.org and back in the safe hands of Aoife, who's handling this show in New York. I'm speaking to you by ISDN. I hope more clearly than the last time I spoke to you. My apologies for my long absence due to the fundraising drive, but we're here to take your calls. It's a dark day for America after the result in Wisconsin. Victory for the right, pretty comprehensive one it seems to be, although you'll know more about the exact facts and figures than me. A boost for Mitt Romney, is it? The exit polls in Wisconsin gave a huge lead to Barack Obama, and yet organized labor and the state Democratic Party was comprehensively defeated. Should they have gone for this recall election? That's one of the questions we'll be discussing today. Or is that applying 2020 vision to an issue that looked far more clear-cut 6 months ago? What does the result mean for Labour in America? What does the result mean for the Democrats in America? What does it mean for the Tea Party and for the right-wing Republicans led by their revanchist candidate, the billionaire Mitt Romney? And since I spoke to you last, of course, I've settled down now into the British Parliament, as well as visiting Cairo, where the elections were then in full swing. The first round election result produced a totally unexpected polarity, an unexpected dichotomy, direct between the Muslim Brotherhood and the former regime of Hosni Mubarak. The trial of Hosni Mubarak produced a verdict that nobody expected. Apparently, hardly anybody was guilty for hardly anything. And Mubarak's sons are now free to re-enter with their ill-gotten gains the political process in Egypt. What will be the result of the second round of election on the 16th of June? That's another of the questions I'm asking today and would like your opinion on. Since then, of course, also the civil war into which regional actors as well as the superpowers, the former colonial powers, have plunged Syria into a bloodbath. 9,000 people have been killed, and the air is thick with talk of another Kosovo-type operation outside of the United Nations framework with the Crusader alliance of the United States and the United Kingdom in the vanguard. So we'll be talking, no doubt, about that as well. And anything else you'd like to talk to me about. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. And Aoife, I'm sure, will remind us of the telephone number to call. Aoife, would you please?
Sure. It's 212-209-2900.
212-2900. That's the number to call. So, Aoife, is there perchance a caller on the line?
Yes, you have someone on the line. It's Robert from the Bronx.
Robert in the Bronx. Very nice to hear you again. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Galloway. I missed you so much all these weeks. I've been missing you. I've been following you on the internet. I saw your debate when you had the other candidates when you were running for your post
for the parliamentary election. Yes.
Why couldn't your party get those other fringe parties together and create one big party where you can challenge Labour and
well, we're not interested in the fringe parties, to be honest with you, Robert. They come with too high a premium for all that they bring. These fringe parties have proved over and over again that they cannot attract votes at election time. They have activists, in many cases good activists. They're good at selling their newspapers to each other. They're good at distributing cyclo-styled leaflets around the place. But the price that they bring with them in terms of program and style of work and so on is not something we're interested in. So there's a parliamentary by-election coming up in the great city of Manchester. It's called Manchester Central. We helpfully know the date, and it's well in advance. It's November the 15th. We'll be challenging New Labour again. on the basis of our opposition to tuition fees for students, austerity for everyone, and war and occupation throughout the world, as well as our opposition to racism and Islamophobia, which is just a form of racism. And we'll be putting up a candidate more than capable of dealing with the Tony Blair clone that New Labour have chosen. So that's going to be a very interesting contest. Put it in your diary and watch this space, as they say, Robert.
Mr. Galloway, I was going to ask you two questions.
Yeah.
Isn't it possible that the generals in Egypt, aren't they on the payroll of the U.S. government? Because I remember Noriega was on the payroll of the U.S. government before he became president. And number two, I was hoping for your fundraiser for you to have a fundraiser so I can have dinner with you.
Well, the next time I'm in the next time I'm in New York, I'd be delighted to do that, Robert. I recall the time that we auctioned me off, and if you're the winner, I'm sure that the station has a record of that. On the first question, the generals in Egypt have for a very long time been on the payroll of the United States, to the tune of billions of dollars of your taxpayers' money, money that could well have been spent in the United States itself. Maybe you wouldn't be in the jam that you're in if you weren't bankrolling dictatorships around the world and their military. But that doesn't mean that the Egyptian army as a whole can be relied upon by the United States, and especially in this now acute polarity which has been created by the result of the first round of the elections. Because if Shafiq, a former general, and a former prime minister under Hosni Mubarak's dictatorship, if he were to win, then the revolutionary surge in Egypt, a part of which you can see online right now in Tahrir Square, where hundreds of thousands of people are demonstrating against the verdicts in the criminal case that Mubarak was facing, one of the criminal cases that he was facing, the murder charges. You can see with your own eyes how unpredictable that is. Because although superpowers can put in money, although they can have a plan, the plan never survives first contact with actuality, with reality. And the revolution in Egypt is too big and involves too many millions of people for anyone to be certain about the result. On the other hand, if Dr. Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, were to win, and I hope that he does, he wasn't my first or even second choice. I was supporting Dr. Abul Futuh, who got millions of votes, but not enough. And Hamdeen Sabahi, the left-of-centre candidate, the Nasserist Arab nationalist candidate, who actually came third in the election and narrowly avoided being in the last ballot. But now that they're both out, I'm supporting the Muslim Brotherhood candidate as the best future for Egypt of the two paths that are on offer. But that will pose other problems for the United States military and the United States government and its intelligence agencies, because, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, in time, will begin to play a role in the broader Middle East, where Egypt will again be the leading country. And in relation to Palestine and Gaza, which is on their doorstep, of course, there will be a very different attitude taken by a Muslim Brotherhood president and an Islamist-dominated parliament than the one taken by the stooge parliament and the puppet president, Hosni Mubarak. Robert, thanks very much for your call, brother. I appreciate it, and I look forward to dining with you if I ever make New York again. Eve, do we have a second call?
Yes, you have Eve from Kings County.
Eve in Kings County, welcome to the show. E, the letter E. That's very enigmatic, E. Go on.
Good day to you, Mr. Galloway.
And to you, sir.
Congratulations again.
Thanks.
On your respect party.
Thank you, brother.
I read a very interesting article on Global Research website last week, and they were discussing what they call the Iraq-Salvador option, something originally cooked up with John Negroponte and his crew, back in the day.
Yeah.
And the ambassador there, the guy who they threw out of Syria, he's like the front man of this option. And, of course, I don't have to lecture you on the Salvador option. I'm sure if you've been there yourself, or probably been there. Do you understand about that, and could you share your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a very good point that you make. But first of all, let me say that I was present when Negroponte was organizing the mass murder of priests and nuns and aid workers and teachers and health professionals, both in El Salvador and in Nicaragua. John Negroponte was the organizer of murder, and he looked like what he was, a kind of mafia boss. And he has continued and had a very long and successful career as an organizer of murder for the United States of America. And that's exactly the plan that they are putting into force now in the absence of United Nations authority in Syria. There's no doubt about that. That does not mean, of course, that the Syrian people's demands against the dictatorship in Syria are invalid or illegitimate, but we cannot separate the existence of a foreign conspiracy against Syria from the facts that we see on the ground today. And we have an impasse. The regime is too weak to crush the insurrection that has been infiltrated into their country, but the insurrection is too weak to topple the regime. So we are in a bloody impasse in which one can expect from the statements of Susan Rice and William Hague, the British Foreign Minister, as a vassal state of the United States, and the statements of others, the tyrants of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and elsewhere, that this is going to be a long and bloody war, what they would call in Central America, guerra prolongada, and it's going to be a very bloody one. And the United States is up to its neck in it. And of course its allies are every day revealed to be an ever more unsavory bunch. The Libyan jihadists, the Al-Qaeda operatives, the Salafist fanatics that have terrified the Christians and the Shiites and many of the women and many of the Sunni Muslims in Aleppo and Damascus in particular are a very rum crew, and the United States taxpayer has the right to ask just exactly who they are being forced to be in bed with. There's a brilliant article on the Guardian website today, guardian.co.uk, by my friend Seamus Milne on this very subject, and I commend it to you and to other listeners. How's that?
Yeah, excellent. We're moving into a quagmire, basically.
You are, and it will not be a short one. This is not Libya. Syria is not Libya. The Libyan regime was almost bereft of support, as was proved by the swiftness of the demise of the dictator there. The Syrian regime is not bereft. It has substantial support, not majority support, but substantial support inside Syria itself, and it has powerful allies, Russia and China and Iran, and the Lebanese resistance movement Hezbollah are all powerful allies of the Syrian regime. So this is going to be a very long and bloody one, and the blowback potential for the United States is considerable. Don't forget that the jihadists that you are now fighting in Afghanistan were once the beneficiaries of the very same arms and money that you're giving to the Syrian jihadists today. Yes, I always make the point that the problem with the reading of Frankenstein by my compatriot Mary Shelley was that people never read it to the end. If they read it to the end, they'd discover that you can create a monster, okay, but it breaks free of your control, and that's how they call it a monster. You don't keep a tiger by the tail. A tiger cannot be kept by the tail. A tiger is too powerful to be kept by the tail. So be careful what you wish for, is what I say to Mrs. Susan Rice, who bears striking resemblance in so many ways to her namesake Condoleezza, who ruled American foreign policy and defense policy for so very long. Thank you very much, brother, for your call.
Excellent analysis.
Thanks, my friend. Ife, are you there? Can you give me a third call?
Yes, I can. It's Peter from Harlem.
Peter in Harlem, welcome to the show, brother. Go ahead.
Yes. I say that Obama should have given support for his presence in Wisconsin. It may have helped with so many more votes. But, of course, he tweeted. And when you tweet somebody, it's not as powerful as if you are present yourself. And I was reading in the paper yesterday that Obama wanted, what's his name, Mayor Bloomberg, he wanted to appoint him to be the president of the World Bank, which is something else. After what Bloomberg has done here, and then we know about the World Bank, that is ridiculous. And that's his friend, too. Bloomberg and is the friend of Obama, and so is the charter school guy in Chicago, the man who started the charter school, which would help monies for the corporation. And I'm not against Obama because of race, and I wish a lot of people would go past race and see what he is doing and what he's not doing. And this drone situation, that's terrible, man. Blood is on his hands, too. And then you got people who make excuses. Well, he's got to do what they tell him and whatnot. That doesn't absolve him of guilt. That's what I want to say.
Well, I'm with you on, I think, every one of those points. I cannot imagine how anyone could ask us to exculpate President Obama from these crimes on the basis that he has to do what they tell him to do. He's the president, for God's sake, and he was elected with a big mandate and a big victory. He came to power when American economic and foreign policy was on the floor, and he could have used the corpse of that neoliberal foreign and economic policy. He could have stood on that and built something new, as President Roosevelt did in the 1930s, but he did not. He accepted the paradigm, by and large, that he inherited, in which case, what's the point of him? Of course, I hope that he defeats Mitt Romney in November, because Romney would only make matters worse. But he'd be making them worse from a very bad start. I commended Seamus Milne's article in The Guardian today on Syria, on guardian.co.uk. I commend his last Wednesday's article on drones, which is equally good and equally important. So read them both if you're going to look up The Guardian after this. As for Mayor Bloomberg as the head of the World Bank, well, God help us. I just cannot understand this constant embrace of one's enemies and their ideology. Is that supposed to be the meaning of bipartisanship? Reaching out across the aisle is surely bringing people who supported the other side over to your side, not you reaching out to give them the power to do the opposite of what you said you were going to do. The more I hear about these kind of things, the more I despair, I must say, of the politics of the United States of America, and not only the USA. This is the mother of all talk shows. This is George Galloway in London with Ife in New York. Hit the phones, Jack and Jacqueline.
Just seems like I was here yesterday. I was. My fellow Americans, you can misunderestimate me if you will, but do not misunderestimate George Galloway and his mother of all talk shows. It always has controversial ideas and sometimes very big words like, my fellow Americans. Enjoy the show.
I've missed that one, I must tell you. That was George W. Bush, but this is George Galloway, and I'm taking your calls on 212-2900. Ife is handling everything with aplomb. As always, Ife, do we have another call?
Of course you do. You have Frank from the Bronx.
Frank in the Bronx, welcome back. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Galloway.
Good morning to you.
All right. I want to make a statement here, and it's going to be a short statement, but it's going to be a truth that I never hear say. Pardon me, my time. If you study history, right, you will notice that there have been many different racial groups, their elite leaders who went for world conquest. At the sphere with their power, the military, whatever. They attempted to conquer. Now, many different races attempted this and did it, but, they failed eventually. Now, I have to say this doesn't matter whether that sounds racist or not, but Japanese did it, Chinese did it, so on and so forth. Now, the last race to do this is the Caucasian race in world conquest. And this is the root of the problem, in my opinion. Now that the Caucasian race rules, they do not want to give up that rulership. They do not want any other race or any other ideology to supplant their rulership over the resources and over the people and over the planet Earth itself. And so, if you, in my opinion, if you take that as the foundation of why all the chaos is happening with nations, then it fits, in my opinion, of why everything is happening the way it's happening.
Well, I do, yeah, of course I have an opinion on it. I just don't accept the racialization of the issue in the way that you have posed it. I, for example, have a white face and blue eyes, and I'm completely against the prevailing power in the world. And there are many people like me. There are black people like Barack Obama who support the prevailing power in the world today, and indeed are dripping in the blood of the victims of that power, at least abroad. There are people in China who are against the prevailing power, but there are other people in China who, if they could change the political paradigm there, would be happy to join it. I take Marx's definition above yours, which is that the history of all human society is the history of class struggle, not racial struggle, but class struggle. Of course, it's true that the ruling class in the world today is in Western and Northern countries predominantly.
Of course, there are. Why can't you just tell the truth and say white? Why is it this language where instead of saying the people who are doing it is not Western, it's Caucasian? If you said Asian, if you said African, then
no, but because I don't think that their color or their race has anything to do with it. They are
what Western means.
They are the ruling class because the Industrial Revolution, the capitalist revolution, began in Europe. And
right, Caucasian, right?
Well, it began in Europe, the Industrial Revolution, and it produced a capitalist class which, as Marx predicted, would become an imperialist class, reaching out across the globe to occupy other people's countries and steal their things.
That's what people in control of that.
Yeah, but not because they're white, but because they're capitalists and imperialists. And within the Western countries today, there are many people of many different racial backgrounds who are a part of that ruling elite. And I gave you the elephant, if you'll forgive me, that's sitting in the corner of the room that you have not yet commented upon, which is President Obama.
You remember the Japanese when they invaded China?
Can you deal with my point about President Obama? How does he fit in? How does he fit into your paradigm?
Okay, so you remember the Japanese when they invaded? Whenever a conquering nation or people invade another nation, they always want representatives to represent them, the conquering power. So if you study the ancient, Japanese when they came into China, those people in power in the Chinese government were sympathetic to the will of the Japanese. So it's basically the same thing with Barack Obama. He's not representing black people as a whole. He's representing, he's a black man representing Caucasian people.
Well, he's representing rich people. I mean, the richest country. Look, listen, brother.
Oh my God.
The richest country in the world will very shortly be China. How will that influence your thinking?
Well, again, like I said, now we go into central banks. We go into what the Caucasians want through China, right, which they're trying to destabilize, like they're trying to destabilize their own country, with this World one world government thing, which they're trying to implement, right? But as long as China is submitting to the will of the Europeans, as long as they will eventually submit to the will and go along with the program.
Well, I can assure you they'll not do that. I can assure you that the days when the West could dictate to China are over, and that China by 2020 will be the biggest economy in the world, and Chinese foreign policy will be ever more assertive. So your paradigm, if it was correct, will begin to crumble at that point. But let me ask you a question.
Yes,
if we're not to judge black people by Barack Obama, why do you keep using the word Caucasians when there are millions of Caucasians like me who are completely against this political system? Don't you think it's a trifle divisive?
Well, I mean, think about this. During slavery, chattel slavery times, there were many Caucasians, whites during that time that were against, like John Brown, which you have to respect. But, however, there was not enough to overcome chattel slavery. So it was the elites, it was the middle class, or the lower class, all combined working to keep the system that chattel slavery in effect, where you have few whites, which you would get credit for. You know, any man that stands up against tyranny and oppression should be applauded. But however, it's very few.
How was it defeated then, slavery in America?
Well, you know, I can't, you know, obviously other people want to call, but remember in United States history,
I just want you to acknowledge that slavery was ended in America by black people and white people. Slavery was ended in America at the great battles that were fought in the American Civil War. And a lot of the soldiers who gave their blood were, as you would put it, Caucasian.
Yes, that's true. The form of slavery was ended. Chattel slavery was ended.
Yeah.
Then it was replaced with Jim Crow. So the form of slavery ended.
Yeah.
So they didn't end slavery because slavery still exists.
Well, let me tell you in conclusion, I had the privilege of hosting John Carlos, the great Olympian, in my city of Bradford a week ago, and it was his birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, John, if you're listening to this. And he gave an exposition of these questions, which I found much more inspiring than my conversation with you, though I respect your point of view. I urge you to read the John Carlos story. He's a very great man and a very great black man. Thanks very much for that call. Ife, do we have another?
Yes, you do. You actually have Hosen, I hope I'm saying this right, from New Jersey.
Hosen in New Jersey, welcome to the show.
Yes, where have you been?
It's been the fun drive, man. That's why I haven't been here.
I know what you're doing. I hope the American left understands that they can do nothing without majority masses, without organizations, patience, politics, which is very tough.
And money, by the way. And money, by the way. Scott Walker outspent the Democrats by 7 to 1. 7 to 1.
Except just that, why even WBAI, the leftists here, they're really kind of calling from the beginning, calling those, whatever you call terrorists, Al-Qaeda's, and, as you said, they were armed by Saudi money and, those in Afghanistan. They're calling them from the beginning revolutionaries, opposition. They can't say their names and all that. Even Amy Goodman. These leftists here seems like they're more Buddhist.
Well, there are a lot of confused.
I'm not kidding. And
no, you're right. There are a lot of confused people out there.
What's going on? And also, I want to just say about the person just talked about Caucasians. Do they mean really like South Russians, Caucasians? They call it Caucasian?
No, I think he means white people like me.
Yeah, well. There's a lot of white people now very, very poor, really poorer than, you have the Latinos here poor, and, it's not really, I think,
I just think it's an unhelpful and false dichotomy. That's my point of view. On the subject of Syria and so on, it's important to make this point, that the Syrian people are as entitled to rise up to overthrow their dictatorship as any other. They have a dictatorship. They have just demands. But what they're not entitled to do is ask me or you to send in our crusader armies and air forces in order to overthrow their government for them, because that way lies perdition. That way lies the replacement of a small tyrant with a big tyrant. And moreover, they're not entitled to ask me to support an increasingly sectarian platform and practice amongst their revolution. They're not entitled to ask me to support the importation by tyrannies darker even than the Syrian tyranny, from Saudi Arabia, for example, of jihadist fighters with American money and American weapons to bring about their revolution for them.
Against Saudi Arabia, which is the worst in the world.
It was the darkest tyranny of them all. The Saudi tyranny is the darkest tyranny of them all. But they're friends of what they laughingly described as friends of democratic Syria. Mrs. Clinton, you can look it up on YouTube, announced the creation of a Friends of Democratic Syria. And the main friends of democratic Syria were the most undemocratic states in the world, namely Saudi Arabia and Qatar and other Persian Gulf dictatorships.
I know better than anybody else, probably. I'm so surprised with this, this UN spokesmen and human rights. It seems like they're really controlled, influenced by U.S. than before. Especially now, when they're reporting about Iranian, sites and things. It kind of seems there's just...
Well, the United Nations has never asked to inspect Israeli nuclear sites. Why not?
I'm asking you, you know better, what...
I think we know the reason. Why not? Because these United States-controlled organizations, of which the United Nations is one, are never going to do that. Kofi Annan has produced a plan which could lead to a negotiated settlement in Syria, but it's being openly and systematically undermined by the Crusader Gulf Alliance in support of the armed insurrection in Syria. So even Kofi Annan, for all his valiant efforts, is seeing his work seeping into the sand along with all the blood. Thanks very much, Hossein, for your call from New Jersey. I don't get enough calls from New Jersey, considering I have a big following there, judging by my mailbox and my Facebook and so on. You can follow me on Facebook at George Galloway MP. You can follow me on Twitter also. This is the mother of all talk shows. This is George Galloway. This is WBAI.
Hello, Tony Blair here, just dashing off to pick up a check and sort out the Middle East problem. But I thought I'd just give a quick plug to the special relationship between me and George Galloway. I can't stand the man.
Well, that's true, but the feeling is entirely mutual. I used to say when Mr. Blair was in power and people asked me about the special relationship between Britain and the United States, I used to say I support a special relationship between Britain and the United States. Our common language, our common culture, common points of history, our role together in the Second World War and so on. I just didn't want a special relationship like the one that Mr. Blair had with George W. Bush, which I compared to the one that existed between Miss Lewinsky and a former U.S. President, Bill Clinton, one-sided, unequal, undignified, with the junior partner always on their knees. Ife, do we have another call?
Yes, you do. You wanted someone from New Jersey. You have someone else. You have
Excellent.
Rose from New Jersey.
Rose, blooming in New Jersey. I'm very happy to hear from you again. How are you?
Fine, George. Welcome back.
Thanks so much. Great to hear your voice again.
I hope you can hear me clearly.
I can.
Whatever's blooming in New Jersey is up my nose this morning, and I'm not sure it's the altitude.
I can hear you. I can hear you fine. It sounds delightfully husky. Sounds delightfully husky, Rose.
Yes, course. I was going to say, maybe I'm suffering from some sort of Wisconsin problem.
Yes. It was a bad day, yeah?
The interesting thing about the callers this morning is that they're dealing with things that they have no control over. And one of my recent light bulbs that went off is that perhaps the American people can take back the away from the electronic system, actual voting. I have a question for you. Is it common around the world for voters to receive a sample ballot in the mail?
No, well, I don't know about the world, Rose, but it's certainly not common in Britain. It doesn't happen in Britain. Neither do we have electronic voting.
Yeah,
we have pieces of paper.
Here in the States, you get a sample ballot so that when you go into the booth, that you are at least reasonably apprised of the various...
Sounds like a good system to me.
Well, it's just something that is sent out, and it doesn't have your name or address or voter ID number on it. But I've got an idea, and I think it should... This little germ could work very nicely, because with the capacity of black box voting in this country, having proved itself in San Luis Obispo, California, and also in Ohio, and probably to a certain extent Florida, if we were able to have some sort of grassroots organization, and I would think that the League of Women Voters would be very open to this, as they were generally pushed out of the presidential election debates, that, sure, go in there and hit your box, play with your buttons. You'd be able to take that ballot and mark your choices on it and stuff it in a box outside, so we have a secondary term of recountability.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could have a much wider sense of how many people voted, how they voted, so that when the media comes out and says, oh, well, it was a 60-40, which was the old game in Florida, that we'd have some statistics, at least, to counter the officialdom that, is going to weld the power no matter how many times we go. Well,
I'm sure that these are good suggestions, Rose, and that there may be others. And I'm not in any way minimizing the importance of these kind of technical issues. But we shouldn't allow them to mask what is a central political weakness that we have. We were soundly beaten in Wisconsin, despite the proliferation of grassroots organization, despite the pretty valiant contest of the mayor and the state Democratic Party. We were badly let down, I believe, by the failure of President Obama to campaign in the state. He clearly made a strategic decision that Walker was too popular and that he would himself alienate independent voters who might vote for Walker, but he hopes will vote for him. I hope he's right about that. The exit polls indicate that he is right about that, and that notwithstanding the result yesterday, he'll still win Wisconsin in the fall. However, the momentum which the right have developed as a result of the defeat yesterday cannot be calculated at this point. It may be that Romney and the Tea Party will rapidly develop momentum and elan and money as a result of this big victory for them yesterday. And that may prove an incalculable at this point a problem for Barack Obama. Don't you think?
Amen, brother.
I mean, I think it was a strategic decision which they made, which may come back to haunt them. And I can't help feeling that it may turn out to have been a mistake. Rose, I hope your stuffiness clears up. It's marvelous to hear from you again. Thanks for that call. 2 in a row from New Jersey. Ife, do we have another call?
Yes, one from Central Valley, New York. This is Steve.
Central Valley, New York. Sounds magical to me. Steve, where are you?
Hey, George, how are you? I'm in Central Valley. It's about...
Tell me where that is. Where is Central Valley?
All right. It's about 50 miles north from New York City.
And is it as lovely as it sounds?
It's every bit as lovely as it
Excellent.
Yes,
Marvelous.
sir.
Marvelous. Go ahead then.
All right. First, I'd like to just make a quick point that I think all of your listeners should be aware of. I don't call into talk shows very often, but what I find very unique about your show is when you call in, you're basically subject to two simple questions. What's your name and where you're from?
Yeah.
There's no probing, screening, anything of that nature.
No. I'm at the crease. I don't know if you know about cricket, but I'm at the crease with my bat in my hand, and you can bowl me any way you like.
And I think that's very, very unique. So when you call in, you get the chairman of the board of the mother of all talk shows.
Excellent.
What I'd like to quickly comment on are some of the points that were made earlier on the show regarding the Scott Walker recall election, and whether the timing was right, and certainly the fact that it didn't get the appropriate support that it deserved by our president. And I think the broader point that I think needs to be made is the fact that all too often our politicians are governed by polls and popular opinion and not the merits of their cause. And I think that polling and popularity should never, ever, ever precede supporting progressive movements, progressive causes, and progressive legislation.
I agree with that.
For example, during the 60s, during the whole civil rights movement, many southern states viewed the legislation as extremely unpopular. Public opinion was firmly against it. Yet with the support and leadership of LBJ, obviously the legislation was ultimately passed. You can make the same argument about gay marriage, workers' rights, etc. And I just find it very...
Well, Dr. King himself, you'll recall, over the Alabama bus strike, he said some people ask if something is politic. Some people ask if something is popular. But I ask myself if something is right. And if it's right, I must support it. The attitude of too many politicians is like the 1930s British Conservative leader Stanley Baldwin, who once said, I'm their leader, I must follow them. The point of being a leader is to lead them and to fight for what is right, whether you win or lose, don't you think?
100%. And I think we're definitely seeing a lack of leadership by this president. He chooses his battles very, very carefully. He reviews every decision he makes with his pollsters, and I think it's at the peril, to your point, of a lot of these good quality progressive causes that, unfortunately, using the Wisconsin example, could have gotten a heck of a lot more traction, could have made a lot more inroads in labor rights, and it's just very, very unfortunate.
Indeed. Steve, thanks for your call in Central Valley. Ife, do we have another?
Yes, you have Rose Ellen. Actually, no, Rose Ellen hung up. You have Lincoln from Mount Vernon. I got to fix my lips, right? Mount Vernon, New York.
Lincoln in Mount Vernon. Welcome back to the show, brother. Go ahead.
Hi, what's up, Galloway?
Hi.
Yeah, I used to be a fast bowler.
You were a fast bowler. Okay, I'm at the crease. Yeah. Bowl me.
I wasn't very good at batting, though, but I was a good fast bowler.
Okay. I await your delivery.
No, I was just saying that because I really used to be a good fast bowler. Yeah, a couple of things. I had actually called to speak about Barack Obama, but I want to do that too, but because of the previous call, I want to say something. In terms of, yes, it is true that there are many people like you who embrace all races, but we still cannot forget the whole picture. During the black people were lynched, and they were not lynched by the system. They were lynched by white people.
Absolutely.
And they were not lynched necessarily by rich white people, but they were lynched by
usually by poor, usually by poor white.
Let me say this. Let me just say this. I'm not indicting anyone. Because, sometimes I myself get into the problem where sometimes I become so passionate that I make people misunderstand where I'm going. We have to realize there's a thing, they say if you hear a lie long enough, you start to believe it. And we must realize that it is true that if you take a little white child at birth, they're not racist, but they are born into a system that's racist.
Sure.
There's this thing as institutionalized racism. I mean, look at white policemen. Little ordinary, some of them almost illiterate little white fellas, they'll become a police, and they will automatically start abusing black colorblind people. I myself have experienced this. And it is because it's something that has become ingrained in the system. You know, you live with something long enough, you start to live it and believe it like it is true. And it is true that, you know, the powers that be, their main interest is really about power and so-called money, etc. But the poor man don't realize it. You know, when Martin Luther King was in jail, you know, there were some racist whites who were in jail with him. And he looked at one of them and he said to them, hey, how much you making? And when this poor white fellow told Martin Luther King his salary, Martin Luther looked at him and said, you know what? You need to join us because you're in the same boat like us. Absolutely. But you see, we are all suffering from this divide and conquer thing.
Exactly.
You follow what I'm saying?
I follow it exactly, and
there are people like you, but you are not in the majority. So I'm saying that I'm not saying that to say that we must be divisive, but if we ignore that other truth...
No, Lincoln, I'm not at all arguing that we should ignore it, not at all. And of course, the prevalence of racism amongst large sections of white people is a major problem that we face, and I hope I've spoken powerfully enough on that on this show as well as elsewhere in the past. But if we fall into the trap of saying that the primary division in the society is between races, then for a start that would be wrong, but it would also mean that we could never win, because there are far more white people in America and in Britain than there are people of color. So if we cannot build a coalition which involves people of all racial groups, then we'll never win. We'll always be the losers.
I believe in building that coalition, but we cannot build it in ignorance or in denial. That's all I'm saying.
No, well, I'm with you on that. I'm absolutely with you on that. I was merely making the point, and it's obvious if you think about it, that racism is not a uniquely white phenomenon. In London, for example, most of the crime, violent crime, that harms, hurts, and indeed kills young black people is black-on-black crime, which is primarily a conflict between Afro-Caribbean black people and African black people. It's one of the most. Let me go on, Lincoln. It's one of the most melancholy truths that I have discovered in my lifetime. I did not believe that this could be true until I absorbed myself in it as an issue. Amongst Indian people, where there are 1 billion Indians in the world, they have a caste system. And the despising and hating and discriminating and loathing of some castes of Indian people for lower castes, again, has to be seen to be believed. Now, they're the same race, but the impact on the lower caste people is exactly the same as the impact of white racism on black people. And I well remember being in Saudi Arabia and talking to my driver, who was a black Arab Muslim, and who was busily telling me how racism could not exist in Islam because Islam regards believers as one ummah, one people, for all places and for all time, and that there could be no such thing as racism amongst Muslims. And it didn't exist, he said, in Saudi Arabia. And then I asked him, well, you're black. If you asked to marry the daughter of a non-black Saudi Arabian Muslim, how would it be viewed by her parents? And he immediately knew that the answer to that question negated everything that he had just been saying to me. So there is racism everywhere, but the most meaningful, the most powerful, pernicious racism in the world today is that between white people and others. Of that I have no doubt and have said 1,000,000 times. And that's because white people have more power to practice their racism against other races at this point in our history than any other group. Forgive me, Lincoln, I'm going to try and squeeze a couple more calls in, at least one more call. Ife, do we have one last?
Yes, you have Eugene from the Bronx.
Eugene in the Bronx, very nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Yes, hello.
Hi,
yes.
Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'd like to commend you, Mr. Galloway, for where you handled that so-called black racist. I think that's part of the problem. But the other thing is I like to say a word or two about the ballot box. But first on the so-called black racist, you were absolutely right. You couldn't deal with the fact of how the Civil War was fought and who fought it. There's racism on both sides of the aisle, and the people in power, not only do they create it, but they thrive on it.
Yep.
And it's ignorance that perpetuates this thing. Now, for so-called, I say so-called black people, to buy into the fact that an African, okay, who married a European is somehow mysteriously black is ridiculous. Okay, and to overlook any you throw in the word based on the fact of his color is stupid.
I think so. I really do. I really do.
And people, knowledgeable people on both sides, both so-called white and so-called black, need to address these ignorant people and tell them that they're fighting a battle that was created in the Crusades, no less, to get people to leave their homes and their families for 30 years to fight a war that they couldn't benefit from because of the so-called infidels, or whatever they call them.
Yeah, you're right. It's this question of false consciousness, isn't it? Can I tell you, Eugene, you see, when I'm in the United States and I'm in airports and I see black soldiers on their way to Afghanistan, or before that on their way to Iraq, I want to shake them, you know. I really do. I want to say, don't you understand that you're being sent there, perhaps to give your blood, certainly, if necessary, to take other people's blood for a system in which you have no vested interest at all, a system which enslaved you, which discriminated against you?
Don't draw that line.
Eugene,
it's not only the so-called black people, it's the white people as well.
Absolutely. Eugene, it's a pleasure talking to you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, Eugene. Call me back next week, God willing. I'll be in the same place at the same time, courtesy of WBAI. This is London Calling by The Clash.
Now war is declared and battle come down. London calling to the underworld. Come out of the cupboard, you boys and girls. London calling, now don't look to us. Phony Beatlemania is splitting the dust. London calling, see we ain't got no swing except for the rain and the crunch of thing. The ice is coming, the sun's zooming in. Meltdown expected, the wheat is going thin. Engines stop running, but I have no fear, 'cause London is drowning.